Hey everyone, and welcome to the live stream. Thanks for coming out. In this live stream, we're going to find out if you are an intermediate level guitar player. And why is that important? One, because people ask me all the time. They say, Blue, what level would you say I'm at? Now, first off, it's very hard to define exactly what is intermediate, right? But I will say the most important thing about this question is that we have a certain set of things that we all should know as guitar players. And what happens for a lot of people is they're going along in their journey learning guitar and then they get stuck, right? Probably all of you have felt stuck at some point. I have heard that from so many students here and online all the time. They say, "Oh, I'm stuck. I don't know what to do next." Often, the reason is because there is some particular thing that they've just missed along the way, especially if you're learning online because you don't have a teacher going, "Oh, wait a second, you need to learn this," or whatever, right? So in this live stream, what we're going to do is we're going to go through, it's a kind of a checklist of all the things that I think every guitar player should know in order to take on any intermediate level guitar lesson online, on my Patreon, or whatever. So essentially, this is the checklist from this book. This is my new book. It's called Fretboard Fundamentals. It just came out. You can see the little thing there. It's available on Amazon, and the book is essentially a checklist of all those things so that if you know all these things which are described in this book and explained in the book, then you're much less likely to get stuck along the way and have those frustrating moments, right? Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to go through that checklist. The checklist is at the end here, and I'll briefly describe each thing. And so you can kind of get a feel for where you are. And then at the end, we'll take some questions. So you can drop some questions in the chat there. I'll probably answer the questions at the end. It'll just be easier for me, right? So I can keep that flow. Okay, so here we go. Let's say, what is number one? Number one, of course, is understanding the fretboard. Because so many people, there's so many students I know, they look down at the fretboard and they kind of just seeing it as like a dizzying array of notes everywhere. Like you kind of memorize some chord shapes and you kind of memorize your pentatonic easy shape, but you think, but how did those guitar players, how do my favorite guitar players, how are they able to just, play everywhere anytime they want? And it's not that hard. We just need to have a good sense of how to understand the fretboard as guitar players because it's very different than all the other instruments, right? So number one is we've got to learn how to use the low E and the A strings as landmarks. Now, I will say, how many guitar students out there in the world are there who are not quick yet at knowing the notes on the low E and the A string? This is absolutely essential, and I know you guys hear me say it all the time. We should know right away that that's a C, because we can then use that information as we can use all these notes as landmarks, I say, to find whatever we need. We can find chords, we can find scales, we can find triads, we can find arpeggios, we can find intervals, everything. And if you think about it, it's kind of neat that I'm not actually asking my students to learn the notes of every single string. I'm not asking you to memorize that that's an A, that's a G there. One day that would be good. Yeah, it's really cool to know that that's an A right there. But in reality, we can still find everything that we need whenever we need it really quickly by knowing the notes on the low E and the A. So make it your goal. If you haven't done that yet, you should know instantly that's an A flat, that's a B flat, that's an E flat, or whatever, right? Then we can really find whatever you need. So here's an example. There's a more advanced example out of curiosity, right? So let's look at this note here. This is a C. I know from this C where a major third is. I know from this C where a minor third is. I know where a fifth is. I know where a minor seven is. I know where a minor third up an octave is. I know where a major third up an octave is. I know where all the scales that I need are from there. I know the chord shapes. You probably already know your chord shapes using that method of landmarks here, right? But it's so many more things that we can do just by using those things. And then we just have to remember all the shapes of the chords, the shapes of the scale, and we got to remember that the B string is kind of a pain, right? So if that's a major third from that C, and that's a major third from that C, but that's a major third from that C because the B string's a funny one, right? And that's what really messes people up, because that's where a lot of times they get stuck and they're like, oh, why is the fretboard so difficult? It really isn't that difficult if you see the visual shapes and you know at the very least the notes on these two strings. It's all about visual shapes, right? Which brings us to the caged system. And a lot of times people will say to me, oh, Blue, how come you don't teach the caged system? How come you don't have a book on the caged system? And the funny thing is that I actually do pretty much teach the caged system. I just don't use the terminology that much, and I don't use the whole system. And I think in reality, most guitar players, most guitar teachers do pretty much what I'm doing. But I'll show you what I'm saying. C, A, G, E, D, right? That's the caged system. And you might say, well, whoop-de-doo, Blue, I can play those cowboy chords. But of course, it's not just about these cowboy chords. We can take any of these chords, like let's say E major, and you probably know it becomes a bar chord, right? We take the E shape here, zoom in on that. That E shape moves up, it becomes G major. And you'll notice I had to know real quick that that's a G, again, using the landmarks on the low E and A, but now also the visual shapes of, in this case, a chord. But it could be a scale, or it could be a more complex chord. Could be, here's a simple one, another simple one. This is E minor, right? That would become G minor. Or what about a more extended chord? Like, what's an extended chord? That's like adding a 7 to a chord, like a E minor 7. So E minor 7, it's the same thing. It just becomes a bar chord up there, right? That's the E minor 7 shape. Or an A minor becomes A minor 7, which becomes C minor 7. Okay, so that's that part. Now we're going to take this cage thing to the next level. So we're going to talk about how we can use these caged shapes to find the scale shapes that we use all the time as well. We can actually use them to find just about any scale shape. But most importantly, for all of us, or for all of you who are wondering, well, am I intermediate yet? Or is there anything important that I'm missing? We've got to know the minor pentatonic shapes at least, right? And we got to know all 5 of them. So many guitar players, they learn their easy shape. And like, some people are so good at easy shape, and they sound awesome. And you might hear them and you might go, wow, that guy is such a good guitar player. And they might have a lot of physical skill. But the funny thing is, you might notice if you watch them long enough, they only play easy shape. They can't actually move around the fretboard very much. It happens all the time. And we don't want to limit ourselves, right? We want to feel like we know whatever chord we have wherever we are. So back to those shapes. Here's an example. We could take this. We said that there was this A minor shape, right? Caged, because caged is also minors. So this is A minor of caged. And it moves up to become, like we said, a bar chord. That's a C minor bar chord. But also, with the kind of caged visualizations, we picture the bar chord, and we can picture the pentatonic shape that belongs to that bar chord as well, that belongs to the A minor shape of caged, right? And it would be a shape 4, what I often like to call funny B string shape, because it has that shape up there, right? So now we see that using the landmark on the low E, the landmark on the A string, plus our caged shapes, we can find anything we need. We can find triads. There's a C minor triad there. There's a C minor triad. What that triad belongs to what pentatonic shape? Easy shape. Right? Which belongs to this chord shape, or this C minor 7 chord shape. Everything is connected, and we want to start to see the fretboard. We want to start to see these shapes as layers, right? We use the landmarks on the E and the A, and then we have the caged shapes, which, I don't really use the terms of the caged shapes because I find the terms confusing. For example, this one that I played, I think in the caged system, they would call that the E minor shape for C minor. And I just find terms like that, E minor shape for C minor, really confusing. I've tried that out. I've tried using that kind of language with students here in person, and I say things like that, and I don't see the light bulb go off over their head, right? So that's how I knew to just say, you know what, just visualize the shape. It's like E minor, but up here. It seems easier. It's the same thing. Okay, so now, back to minor pentatonic. Like we said, we want to know not only easy shape, and we know now we can find the shapes using the caged shapes, but also we want to be able to move smoothly through the shapes. We don't want to be stuck in a shape, move stuck in a shape. And there are very common ways to do that. Common meaning there's one in particular. There's one move. Some people call this diagonal pentatonic. I call it run number 1. And the reason why I call it that, I give it its name because it happens in so many famous guitar solos. We see so many famous guitar players do this particular run or this diagonal line. It's a way of moving from, if I stay in C here, C minor, there's my root, give you a close up here. This would be easy shape here, right? And below that, I've got 4 notes. It's really just from shape 5, we would say, below that, but I'm only going to use those 4 notes. And then I'm going to slide up into easy shape. And then I'm going to slide up into what a lot of people call the box. It would be the top of shape 2, or I like to call it extension shape. And so that's the most common way to move around the fretboard in that area. Now, again, we don't want to be limited to just one area, so we want to be able to run through shapes in common ways. And to get to that level, you just memorize, in this case, I call it run number 1, and then we have run number 2 on our Patreon. You can find that as well. So what do we got? We got landmarks. We've got our caged shapes to visualize what pentatonic shape we're in currently. And then we've got runs to get our way through or from one shape to another, you could say. Now, next level, not even next level, this I say for sure is like low intermediate level that we should all know is when you memorize the pentatonic shapes, don't just memorize the shape. Memorize also where the roots are, right? Those are the roots there of easy shape C minor pentatonic. There's roots of shape 4 C minor pentatonic. And why is that important? That's important because if we're going to improvise, we want to be expressive. We want to avoid sounding like we're meandering on the pentatonic shapes. And a lot of people say that to me. They say, Blue, how do I get it to sound more musical, more expressive, more like I'm saying something rather than just meandering? And knowing where those intervals are in the pentatonic shapes is essential. That way, we can do things like targeting. You could play a simple lick and land on a specific note. In that case, that's just the root. And I know where the root is because, well, I know all these notes, but you could know where all the root is, where the roots are, because you just memorize them where they are in the shape, or you know your landmark now because you're going to memorize the bottom 2 strings, right? And you might memorize your interval shapes. That's an octave shape, right? And like we said before, there's all these interval shapes that we can memorize. That's a 5th. So if that's a fifth, I could play a lick, and on the fifth, it gives it a different sound. There's the fifth, right? Which would work really nice on a 5 chord, of course, because that's the root of the 5 chord. So point being is that the one level is just memorizing the pentatonic shapes, yes. But we want to understand the pentatonic shapes on a deeper level, and that is understanding what's inside them. Where are the important notes, like the roots and the fifths? And the blue notes. Probably a lot of you have already memorized the blue notes because people love that sound, and it's easy. But again, you might know where the blue notes are in easy shape, but where is it in all the other shapes? Like in extension shape, up here, it's here. And there's a root in extension shape, right? Because we've memorized where those are. You can actually hear it too. Over time, your ear will really develop the more that you seek out specific tones, because you might have just memorized where it is visually, but also the more you kind of do it, you could say that memorizing it visually is kind of the intellectual way of doing it. And some people will say, oh, well, that's not how Jimmy Page did it or whatever. I don't know about that. Because over time, when you memorize it visually, what happens is it trains your ear what it also sounds like. Because you're intentionally going, okay, I'm aiming for a root, and I know that's the root in extension shape. And every time you do that, your brain, your ear, as we say in music, just starts to notice, oh yeah, I hear that resolve. And then what happens over time is it's a more expressive way of playing, because you're not always thinking, oh, I'm going to go to a root here. It's like your ear wants that root, and it goes to the sound of it even. I hope I explained that right. That's a kind of a neat thing, is that's a higher level thing, right? That's definitely intermediate. Because we hear the root is resolved, right? Or the minor third has a character, or the fifth has a character. Every note has a character. Okay, so that's pretty involved pentatonic. Let's go to the next step here. We're going to talk about common chord changes. Now, all my students here in Vancouver get these quizzes all the time, almost every week. And sometimes I see their eyes roll because they're like, oh, not this again, Blue. But it's so important. And in its basic sense is this, that often guitar students think of chords and they think G, C, D, whatever. They go like, this song goes G, C, D, C, D. But actually, pro-level guitar players, they get that, but we don't think of it in that way. We think of it as 1, 4, 5 or 1, 5, 4, 5. And why is that? When I was younger, I really resisted this concept. I thought, this is confusing. I don't like the numbers. Why? I already know it's G, C, D. Why don't I, or whatever the song is. Why don't I just think letters? But I forced myself to start thinking numbers, and what happened was awesome, because it meant that I was able, and eventually, to just hear songs and hear the chord progression without even playing it, without even having a guitar in hand. You can hear, oh, that song just goes 1, 4, 1, 5. You can hear it, no matter what the key. So in that case, it's not just G, C, D, or whatever it is. It might be 1, 4, 5 in the key of C, right? What's 1, 4, 5 in the key of C? You can put that in the comments. See how quickly you can do that. 1, 4, 5 in the key of C. They all have a certain sound. And so many of the songs that we love, from rock and roll, from folk, from pop music, from country music, and most especially from blues, are all, they have 1, 4, 5 as the basis for the structure of their songs. So it helps us to hear a song very quickly, learn a song very quickly, and memorize the song very quickly. A lot of times in rehearsals, if you play in a band, you'll hear people say, oh, this song's easy. It's just 1, 4, 5 and C. Okay, easy. And you can hear your way through it. Nothing to it, right? But speaking of the blues, another thing that all of us, all of us guitar players should know is how to play a 12-bar blues form. Whether or not you even played blues guitar, blues form, the 12-bar form, is billions of songs even outside of the blues. So that is just essential. And again, it's really going to develop your ear. Over time, you're just going to hear 4-chord, 5-chord, 4-chord. And you'll hear that entire structure. You might be in your car, driving to work, listening to Led Zeppelin or whatever, and you go, wait a second, that's just a 12-bar form. And then you'd be like, that's just a 12-bar form with a riff. Man, I can already visualize on the guitar how to play that, even though you might be driving and got the steering wheel in your hand, right? So it enables us to be able to hear changes, chord changes in advance, and even soloing. It's going to develop your soloing so much better because you're going to be able to target those tones. You're going to hear those tones that you might want whenever they come around for that particular chord. I would say that's next level stuff. That solid intermediate, middle, high, intermediate level stuff is being able to target certain chords in your solo while you're improvising. That's higher level. Okay, so now, next one is we're going to talk about major pentatonic. Okay. Again, it always amazes me that so many people who learn guitar, they've learned minor pentatonic because it sounds awesome, yes, but for some reason, they don't even know that there's this whole other sound that is just as easy and sounds incredible called major pentatonic, and I don't know why that is. So I've made it my personal mission to make sure that everyone who takes lessons here and who watches my YouTube channel and is on my Patreon, that we all know major pentatonic. Sometimes I'll get students say, well, Blue, I just like the sound of minor. I just think minor sounds more cool. You know, and then sometimes what happens, the next week they'll come back and be like, oh, can you show me how this Allman Brothers song goes? I'm like, didn't you just say you don't want to do anything major or major pentatonic? That's happened a few times. The thing is that major pentatonic is an essential sound that we want, right? We want that sound. And the cool thing is that it is the same shapes. So it's not like it's any more difficult. It's barely anything more to learn. That's the thing that always kind of is hard to get our brain wrapped around that in some ways, that C major pentatonic, hear it in context of a C chord, has exactly the same notes as A minor pentatonic. They're different scales, and it's the context that matters. But most importantly, we've got to memorize where the roots are. We said that about minor pentatonic, right? But when we play major pentatonic, the roots are in different spot. So we do have to, I guess that's the work. That's about the only work maybe that exists for getting good at major pentatonic, is then just memorizing, well, the intervals are in different places. But they're not hard to find, right? You just memorize them. It's just a bit of work. And then we have this whole other sound. Knowing only minor pentatonic would be like a painter who only paints with green paint or something. And it might be super cool for a while, but after a few years, you'd be like, well, it'd be nice to have a bit of yellow or red in here. That would be cool. So we don't want to limit ourselves. Why limit ourselves? Guitar is fun, and guitar is even more fun when we know more about these things and we have these different colors, if you will, that we can access to play. So definitely don't avoid your major pentatonic. Okay, so that's a pretty good rundown of all the stuff that's in this book. And at the back of the book is a checklist. Yeah, is a checklist, and that's kind of what I'm going through here in my mind. I probably missed a few things because I was just sort of going through it from memory here. And what we're going to do, actually, before we do that, first I just want to thank all our Patreon rock stars. I really appreciate all your support. It's great to have all of you on Patreon, and you all help to make this happen, and we really appreciate that here. But what we're going to do now, I think, is we're going to do some Q&A. And I think if we've got some questions in the chat, you can let me know here. I can't quite see them, but I think Frankie's going to send us the Q&A here in a second. So he's going to send me a question or two. Anything about guitar? I can't answer other questions. Okay. Lou Velasquez has a question about improvisation and timing and would like some suggestions to improve. Feels good about chords and scales. Yeah, timing is a good one, especially like expressiveness. So timing can mean a couple different things. One is we want to make sure that if we are playing, say, a series of single notes, we want on this, you could say micro level, we want each of those single notes to be in the pocket. Not like a robot. It's not like it has to be perfectly on a metronome, but we want to sound like it has a groove. How do we get good at that? It's a lot of practice, and it's a lot of, I learned, was relaxing. So I learned this from when I started performing many years ago. We won't say how many years ago. Is that I did get a little nervous at times, and my hand would kind of tense up, and I would think, oh, I gotta hit. I don't know. It was subconscious, I guess you could say. And when I learned to just relax everything here and realize that I don't have to hit the guitar hard, especially an electric guitar. Once this relaxed, then I was able to think more about each individual note and placing it nicely. And then over a time, you don't really think about each individual note. So that's one part of it, right? To say, you just use a jam track and do something simple, like this. Don't try to play a difficult lick yet when you're just working on improving that kind of timing. In fact, meander. I always say don't meander. But in this case, when you're working on just playing in the pocket, is you've got to do that. And make sure you've got correct down, up picking, right? Sometimes people don't realize they've got some kind of funny picking thing going on here where they sometimes go down, sometimes go up, and it's a little bit random. You might need, if that's the case, you got to be real conscious of it. You might, if you've got a guitar teacher, you can ask them to watch your right hand, or you could film yourself. It's not that everything we play is alternate picking. There are definitely phrases that are not, but it should be it should be something pretty much efficient, right? And then after that, it's to make sure that if you're improvising, leave space. Say something, leave space. Say something, leave space, right? So that's like so many levels of timing, right? There's the micro, and then there's the kind of macro of saying something with your solos. Okay, cool. So I hope that helps. Now, we got lots of questions. I better go faster through this. Okay. I'm not sure what this is. Drez Bogies asks, is major and minor pentatonic the same, just started in different position according to the key? Yes, is a very good question. So the weird thing about the major and minor pentatonic, and this confuses everyone, and that is that why is it the same notes, right? It's all about context. So we think about this. If I'm in the key of C and I want C major pentatonic, I'm going to take my pinky and put it on C, right? And I play easy shape from there. But here's the key. If I want C minor pentatonic, that's the C, I'm going to put my first finger on C, and I'm going to play easy shape from there. So notice that the notes of C major pentatonic are different than the notes of C minor pentatonic, right? They have different set of notes. They both start on C. Then the weird thing is that C major has the same notes as A minor. Now, you don't need to memorize all that. The main thing is just to use this first finger pinky rule. Pinky on the root, and you play easy shape from there. That gives you major pentatonic. Pinky gives you major pentatonic. First finger gives you minor pentatonic. And it's about knowing, oh yeah, actually that's another thing in the book. It's about, well, how do I know which scale to use when? Well, if it's in a minor key, you got to use minor pentatonic, right? There are other minor scales, yes, but generally speaking for rock and roll and blues. But in a major key, especially a bluesy rock and roll song, the beautiful thing is that we can actually use minor pentatonic. See how that sounds fine against that C7 chord. we can use major pentatonic over the same chord. Or we can mix and match. Here's major pentatonic. Here's minor pentatonic. So that's the quickest way I can answer that in this Q&A. But if you want more on that, check out my video called, I think it's called First Finger Pinky Rule or something like that. If you search the channel for First Finger Pinky Rule, I think you'll come up with that. Okay, so now where am I here? Matthew asks, how do we develop our ability to follow the chord sequence while soloing? Yeah, that's a big one. And now I would say that that's not low intermediate, that's solid intermediate, but it's a great goal to get to work on. And so one thing you can do is put on a jam track, but make sure you know the chords of the jam track in advance, what the sequence is and how long each chord is. And then you play the chords first before you start soloing. Say this, it's this. Whatever it is, I don't know. This is starting to turn into Let It Be. But you make sure you play them first so that you hear them in the track. That's the thing, is that people start kind of soloing and they're so focused on their soloing, they're not listening to the track. So you got to kind of prove to yourself first, I know what the chords are because I played them along to the track, it worked. And that opens your ears up to listening to the track while you're soloing. And then step 2 is you give yourself one of the chords as a goal. You say, let's say the song goes C, G. You say, every time that G comes around, I'm going to hit a G note. And that way you're training yourself to listen for it. And don't even really try to solo yet. It'd be so simple. You just be listening to the track. Oh, there's the G. And then if you can nail that G every time, then you say, okay, now I'm going to play a scale, but when this, or some licks, some very simple licks, but when that G chord comes around again, you're going to hit the G. So it's an exercise. Don't try to make it sound great until it's easy for you to hear that chord. And then you can do it. It does take time. It takes a lot of practice. It's a challenging skill to do for sure. Okay, where are we? Tick7146, could you talk about blending major and minor pentatonic and connectors? Yes, I can do that briefly because it's a big topic. But basically, we want to, well, I kind of mentioned that if we're in a bluesy or a rock and roll thing and it's a kind of a major key, or you've got chords like C7, F7, you can use both major pentatonic and minor pentatonic. We said that moments ago, right? Now, how do we blend the two together? Again, it's all visualizations, right? I'm not thinking about the scale tones. I'm not thinking the C major pentatonic is C, D, E, G, or whatever it is. I'm thinking about the shapes, and I can visualize them one over top of the other. So I want major pentatonic. I can visualize this would be, that would be the box, people call it, or shape 2, or I call it the extension, right? And then I ask myself, well, I'm just using my landmarks, right? That's a landmark, that's a C. So what's minor pentatonic there? Is easy shape. So that's the short answer, and that is that we got to be able to visualize them. But another thing is, you could do two strategies. One is a lot of people say go up major pentatonic and down minor pentatonic. That's a good strategy. Down minor pentatonic. That does sound good, right? Or another strategy that I really like is when it's on the one chord, you use major pentatonic. You gotta be able to hear those chords, right? And then when it's on the 4 chord, you go to minor pentatonic. Whoops. That's another good strategy. So 2 good strategies: up major, down minor pentatonic, or major pentatonic on 1 chord and then change to minor pentatonic on the 4 chord. Those are 2 really quick, good strategies you can try out. Okay, we got Luis Carlos de Souza. How, where, when to transition from minor to major pentatonic? I think I just answered that, so thank you. Okay, we got a couple more. We're going to run out of time here because I actually do have some students coming here today, so I've got to teach them in person. Yoli Builds asks, tabs or by ear for learning leads? Good question. I find reading the tabs takes way longer than it should. That's a good question. In fact, it's interesting. Another thing in this book that I say is do not be afraid of tabs. But it's interesting, your point about should I also learn by ear? I think ultimately we should in the long run get good at both. But I'm actually a big believer in tabs because tabs are so fast. And I noticed that a lot of people avoid tabs because they think, oh, what are all these numbers? What are all these lines? But once you get fast at reading tabs, it is the fastest method. If you want to learn something quick, or if you're watching, any of my videos or lots of other people's videos with the tabs on it, you can read the phrase really quick eventually. It doesn't take that long. I know a lot of students resist learning tabs because they're kind of like, oh, it's confusing. It is confusing at first, but believe me, you can get good at it. It's not that hard. But you have a good point about learning by ear. Learning by ear is also good because that is training us to be able to hear certain tones, right? I think that comes from a combination of learning by ear, yes, but also when you read a tab, I think the mistake that a lot of students make is when they're reading a tab, they just think something like, they think, well, it says here that I go 8, 10, 8, 10, 8. Yes, but 8, 10, 8, 10, 8 is not just 8, 10, 8, 10, 8. It's C minor pentatonic. And when you can read tabs, but then also kind of visualize what is the guitar player thinking at that moment, that's the higher level. That's where you want to get to eventually. And you can. It's just practice. So a little both. If you want to get good at learning solos by ear, just pick simple ones first, right? Pick simple ones. Do like the wonderful solo to Let It Be. It's a great solo, George Harrison. Okay, I'm going to do maybe a couple more, and then we're going to have to call it. Let's see. Willie asks if he should focus on triads instead of chords. No, you should focus on both. But you should do chords first. You should be able to find any basic bar chord first. Because the triads, in my mind, they are just a piece of it. Like, if we see here, I just grabbed a random chord. This is B flat for whatever reason. The triad's here. It's inside the chord, right? Or if I have this B flat, here's the triad right here. And then over time, you're going to see all those things connected. Chord, triad, and the scale shape. Because this triad, I'll show you here. There's the triad, right, is part of major pentatonic. Easy shape. So we got to do them all, but maybe in this order. Chord first. Make sure you got these basic chords, right? And then pentatonic shapes, and then maybe triads. That's a better order to do it, I think. Okay. Lee Fisher, what is a good way to start to incorporate arpeggios into solos? Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, I think I did a video on that recently. Maybe it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, so you can check that out. But the main point about arpeggios that I feel is that if you just look up arpeggios online, or if you buy a book, it's like arpeggios, that's not really the right approach, because it's going to give you something that's kind of academic. It's like, well, this arpeggio is root third fifth, and then this arpeggio is this. What you want is arpeggios that sound cool. So we want to be able to see the arpeggio. So if I'm back on B flat here, there's an arpeggio. Arpeggio is just a chord, right? Just a triad in some cases. But we want to be able to connect. I lost my guitar pick, but that's okay. We want to be able to connect the arpeggio to the scale. Right? That's what makes it sound more cool. Connecting the arpeggio to the scale or the lick. And then also making more interesting arpeggios rather than just root third fifth. Because root third fifth can sound corny. We want to be able to do, say, let's do a cool, like, I don't know, minor 9. That's a cool arpeggio. Then it's not just root minor third fifth, it's root minor third fifth, maybe minor 7, and then 9. So that's getting way more complex, definitely. That is, what would that be? Was that advanced? I don't know. It's too hard to define these things, right? Okay. So I'm gonna take one more, and then I gotta get going. So Todd says major or minor over the 5 chord. Yeah, well, that is a good question. Your choice. Your choice. That's what's so cool about when you get good at being able to solo over the chord changes. So you're probably referring maybe to, I'm saying major pentatonic on the 1 chord, minor pentatonic sometimes on the 4 chord. 5 chord could be either of those, but also could be major pentatonic of the 5 chord. So let's go back to that key of C, C7, F7, G7, right? Any G7 chord or any G major chord, I could have G major pentatonic for. So we can also change the scales for each of those chords. But generally speaking, you can also just stay minor pentatonic of the root key, right? That would be the more traditional bluesy thing to do, is it would just be minor pentatonic of the root key. So if the root key is C7, then it would be C minor pentatonic. But you've got lots of options in the end, right? It's also like, what do you like the sound of? But you can try them all out, and it could depend. It could depend on the song too, right? Okay, so I better go because I'm going to have some students coming here soon. But I thank you all much for coming. Don't forget, if you want to check out the book, it's available on Amazon. And this week on Patreon, we got a deep dive into the sounds of Dickie Betts. And I hope to see all of you there. And thanks a lot to all our Patreon Rockstar sponsors. And if you got more questions, I could come back later today and I can check the comments and hopefully I can answer some of those. All right. Thanks a lot, everyone. Really appreciate you coming out. See you soon.